The overhead lights flickered twice, then 3 times, then held steady for exactly 4 seconds before repeating the pattern. At 35,000 feet, with storm clouds hammering the fuselage, oxygen masks dropped from their compartments like yellow jellyfish. Isabella Sterling's wineglass tumbled, burgundy spreading across her cream blazer. In coach, 7-year-old Lily Carter clutched her father's flannel sleeve. Ethan Carter didn't panic. His trained eye caught what others missed, that flicker cadence wasn't random. Rising from his seat, he pointed toward the aft service hatch. Why would a single dad in coach know what executives didn't? The truth of who he was would rewrite everything, starting with a notebook that could redraw fate itself. The morning had begun like any other in Ethan Carter's modest duplex on the outskirts of Denver. Dawn light filtered through kitchen curtains as he worked on Mrs. Chen's generator in the backyard, his movements precise and deliberate. Each bolt received exactly 18 foot-pounds of torque. Not 17, not 19. The sequence mattered. Ground first, then neutral, then live, always in that order. It was the same methodical care he'd once applied to aerospace systems, back when his name appeared on patents instead of repair invoices. "Dad, your eggs are getting cold," Lily called from the kitchen window, her voice carrying that particular note of 7-year-old authority when she felt her father needed managing. "2 more minutes, sweetheart. Just need to test the automatic transfer switch." The generator hummed to life, its rhythm steady and sure. Mrs. Chen would have reliable backup power through Colorado's unpredictable spring storms. Ethan made a note in his worn notebook, the same one he'd carried for 15 years. Its leather cover soft from handling, filled with sketches of circuits and systems, memories of a time when he'd designed rather than repaired. Inside, Lily had arranged breakfast with the precision she'd inherited from him. Orange juice at 10 o'clock from the plate, fork at 3, napkin folded into a perfect triangle. On the wall behind her, a photo of Sarah smiled down at them, Ethan's late wife, gone 3 years now from the aggressive cancer that had emptied their savings and reshaped their world. "Mrs. Patterson says we're flying today," Lily announced, spooning yogurt with studied concentration. "She's going to visit her new grandbaby in Seattle." "That's right. You excited about your first plane ride? Will it be loud?" "Louder than a car, quieter than the lawnmower. You'll feel it most in your chest during takeoff." Lily considered this with the seriousness she brought to all new information. "Like when the base is too high in Mr. Rodriguez's truck?" Exactly like that. They were flying to Seattle for a specialist appointment, Lily's annual checkup with the pediatric cardiologist who'd monitored her mild arrhythmia since birth. Coach tickets had taken months of saving, repair jobs squeezed between school pickups and homework help. But some things couldn't be compromised. Fixing machines is fixing lives, Ethan often thought, though sometimes the machine that needed fixing was the human body itself. 3 time zones away, Isabella Sterling stood in her Manhattan penthouse, watching the city wake up through floor-to-ceiling windows. Her reflection in the glass showed what the business world expected. Platinum blonde waves, styled to perfection. The red V-neck bodycon dress that had become her signature, the kind of posture that commanded boardrooms. At 34, she ran one of the largest aviation finance groups in North America, a position she'd earned through 14-hour days and the kind of strategic thinking that turned struggling airlines into profitable ventures. The merger documents on her tablet told a troubling story. FlightPath Solutions, their potential acquisition target, showed impressive margins, but something felt wrong in the maintenance supply chain data. Too many third-party contractors, too many companies that existed only as addresses in Delaware. Her CFO dismissed her concerns. The numbers worked. The deal would close. Stock prices would soar. But Isabella had learned to trust her instincts, especially when they whispered warnings. "The Denver flight's been moved to 11:30. Her assistant's voice came through the intercom. "Storm system moving through the Rockies. Fine. Make sure the presentation's loaded on my tablet. And Sandra? Pull everything we have on subcontractor maintenance standards. Every audit, every report, every complaint." She'd be flying commercial today. The company jet was in mandatory maintenance, an irony that wasn't lost on her. First class on Mountain Airlines Flight 482, Denver to Seattle, a route she'd analyzed dozens of times in acquisition reports but never actually flown. The aircraft type caught her attention in the booking. A 737-800, recently acquired from a budget carrier, refurbished under FlightPath's maintenance program. The same program that showed those troubling irregularities. At Denver International, the morning rush created its own ecosystem of purpose and delay. Ethan and Lily navigated security with practiced efficiency, shoes off, tablets out. Lily's small backpack yielding a collection of colored pencils and library books. Ahead of them in the priority lane, Isabella Sterling moved through the checkpoint with the unconscious authority of someone who'd logged 500,000 miles in 5 years. They would board the same aircraft, breathe the same recycled air, face the same crisis. Though none of them knew it yet. In his shirt pocket, Ethan carried 3 things that would matter before the day ended. A mechanical pencil, his notebook, and an expired Boeing systems engineer ID card he'd never quite brought himself to throw away. They were remnants of a former life, carried now more from habit than hope. But habits, like the flicker patterns of failing electrical systems, sometimes carry messages we don't recognize until the crucial moment arrives. The boarding gate for Flight 482 buzzed with the controlled chaos of modern air travel. Business travelers hunched over laptops, families corralled children, and gate agents made announcements that competed with the ambient noise of rolling luggage and CNN. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the 737 sat connected to the jet bridge, its white fuselage bearing the Mountain Airlines livery, a stylized peak that seemed to point skyward, promising safe passage over the Rockies. Captain George Wilkins walked the exterior of his aircraft, conducting the visual inspection that 28 years of flying had made second nature. He ran his hand along the fuselage, checking for dents or scratches that might indicate structural issues. The aircraft had come to Mountain Airlines just 6 months ago, part of a bulk purchase from a defunct budget carrier. The logs showed regular maintenance, all boxes checked, all requirements met. But George had learned to feel an aircraft's temperament through more than paperwork. This one felt tired, like a horse that had been ridden hard and groomed just enough to look presentable. Inside the cabin, Venus Hale directed her crew with the efficiency of a conductor preparing an orchestra. Every seat pocket checked, every safety card aligned, every overhead bin verified. She'd worked flights for 12 years, could spot a nervous flyer at 50 feet, a medical emergency waiting to happen, or trouble before it announced itself. Today felt different, not wrong exactly, but charged, like the air before a thunderstorm. The boarding process began with its familiar rhythm. First-class passengers settling into leather seats, overhead compartments accepting designer luggage, the subtle negotiations of armrest territory. Isabella took her seat, 2 amperes, sliding her tablet from her bag and powering through emails while the cabin filled behind her. Her fingers moved across financial projections, maintenance cost analyses, fuel hedge positions, the mathematics of keeping aircraft profitable and airborne. Behind the curtain that separated the classes, coach passengers filed past in the familiar dance of finding seats, stowing bags, apologizing for bumped elbows. Ethan guided Lily to row 27, their seats near the back where the engine noise would be loudest but the tickets cheapest. Lily took the middle seat without complaint, immediately fascinated by the safety card's illustrations. "Dad, why does the person in the picture look so calm when the plane's in water? It's their job to show you what to do without making you worried. But shouldn't they look at least a little worried? For honestly?" An elderly woman struggling with her overhead bag caught Lily's attention. Without prompting, the girl unbuckled and stood on her seat. "I can push while you lift," she offered. Together they managed the bag, the woman patting Lily's hand in thanks. Venus, passing through on her final cabin check, noticed the interaction. She'd seen 1,000 children on flights, most absorbed in tablets or games. This one was different, present, aware, engaged with the world around her. Venus made a mental note, the kind that experienced crew members file away, never knowing which observations might matter later. The overhead panel lights flickered, just once, barely noticeable, the kind of thing that happened in any electrical system. But Ethan's eyes tracked upward, watching. 30 seconds later, it happened again, then again at 45 seconds. He pulled his notebook from his pocket, mechanical pencil clicking as he extended the lead. On a blank page, he began marking time intervals. Flicker, 0. Flicker, 0:30. Flicker, 0:45. Flicker, 1:20. Flicker, 1:50. A pattern, but not a regular one. The intervals were increasing, but not linearly. More like a capacitor struggling to hold charge, bleeding power at an accelerating rate. His pencil moved across the page, sketching a rough circuit diagram from memory, the auxiliary power bus configuration used in most 737 variants, if he was right about what he was seeing. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Wilkins. We're expecting a bit of weather over the Rockies today. Nothing unusual for spring in Colorado. We'll do our best to find you smooth air. But please keep those seatbelts fastened when seated. Flight attendants, prepare for departure. The pushback from the gate felt normal. The taxi to the runway felt normal. The engine run-up felt normal. But Ethan kept marking intervals in his notebook, the pattern becoming clearer with each data point. By the time they lined up for takeoff, he'd filled 2 pages with timing marks and calculations. The degradation curve was subtle but undeniable. Whatever was failing in the electrical system was doing so in a way that would likely escape the aircraft's built-in diagnostics until it crossed a critical threshold. The engine spooled up. That distinctive whine that builds to a roar, pressing passengers back into their seats. Lily grabbed Ethan's hand, not from fear but from excitement, her eyes wide as the ground fell away. Denver spread below them, quickly shrinking to a grid of streets and buildings, then disappearing entirely as they climbed through the first layer of clouds. 20 minutes into the flight, the weather arrived as advertised. The aircraft bucked and rolled, finding pockets of unstable air that made drinks impossible and tested the strength of stomach and seatbelt alike. But turbulence was normal, expected, planned for. What happened next was none of those things. The lights didn't just flicker. They failed completely for 3 full seconds. Emergency lighting kicked in, casting the cabin in an eerie yellow glow. Then main power returned. But wrong somehow, the brightness oscillating like a heartbeat. The intercom crackled with static before Venus's voice came through, professionally calm but with an edge that experienced travelers recognized. Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing some minor electrical irregularities. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. We'll update you shortly. In the cockpit, Captain George Wilkins and First Officer Janet Chen ran through their electrical malfunction checklist with practiced precision. The main bus showed normal. The emergency bus showed normal. But the auxiliary bus, the system that powered non-essential but important components, was fluctuating wildly. Could be a generator controller, Janet suggested, her fingers dancing over the overhead panel. Want me to try cycling it? Negative. Not until we understand what we're dealing with. George had learned long ago that fixing the wrong problem often created new ones. Let's see if we can. The oxygen masks dropped. Not deployed, that would suggest controlled release. They dropped like someone had cut their strings, yellow cups dangling from clear tubes, swaying with the aircraft's movement. The cabin pressure was normal, all indicators green, but the masks hung there like a verdict on everything they thought they knew about their aircraft's condition. Isabella's wine glass, balanced on her tray table while she worked, toppled as the aircraft lurched. The burgundy spread across her cream blazer like a bloodstain, soaking through to the silk blouse beneath. She didn't curse, didn't exclaim, just watched the stain spread with the detached interest of someone processing too many wrong things at once. Her tablet showed an email about maintenance cost overruns. The oxygen mask swayed inches from her face. The two things felt connected in a way she couldn't articulate. In row 27, Lily pressed against Ethan's shoulder. "Dad? It's okay, sweetheart. The plane's just confused about something. Like when your tablet freezes and needs to restart." But his notebook told a different story. The flicker pattern had accelerated, and now with the masks deployed, he could guess what was happening. The auxiliary bus wasn't just failing, it was cascading, sending error signals through interconnected systems. The masks dropping meant the cabin pressure sensor circuit had received a false signal, probably from electrical noise bleeding across inadequately shielded connections. If he was right, more systems would start showing false positives soon. He was right. The seatbelt sign began flashing erratically, The no smoking sign defunct for decades but still wired illuminated. Galley power cycled on and off. Reading lights flickered in a wave from front to back, like dominoes falling in slow motion. The aircraft's confused electrical system was having the aeronautical equivalent of a seizure, each malfunction triggering others in a cascade that the pilots couldn't possibly track fast enough. Captain Wilkins made a decision. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the captain. We're going to begin a precautionary descent and diversion to the nearest suitable airport. Please follow all crew member instructions. We have full control of the aircraft, but abundance of caution is our policy. The word precautionary was chosen carefully, technically true but incomplete. They had control for now, but if the electrical problems spread to flight-critical systems, if the Cascade reached the fly-by-wire computers, or the fuel pumps, or the hydraulic controls, precautionary would become emergency, would become something worse. Ethan stood up, not dramatically, not suddenly, but with the deliberate movement of someone who'd made a calculation and reached a conclusion. Lily looked up at him, question in her eyes. "I need to talk to the crew," he said quietly. "About the lights?" "About the lights." He moved forward through the swaying cabin, past passengers fumbling with oxygen masks they didn't need but didn't dare ignore. Venus intercepted him at the mid-cabin galley, her expression professional but firm. "Sir, I need you to return to your seat. I need to speak with the captain about the electrical failure." "Sir, the pilots are handling. The auxiliary bus is in Cascade Failure. Probably started with a capacitor bank in the aft electrical bay. The pattern's indicative of a specific component degradation you see in 737 seconds that have had incomplete refurbishment. I can help stabilize it, but only if we act before it reaches the main bus." Venus studied him for a long moment. She'd heard 100 passengers claim special knowledge, usually wrong, often dangerously so. But something in this man's specificity, the casual way he'd said capacitor bank and Cascade Failure, made her pause. "What's your name?" "Ethan Carter. I used to design these systems. Boeing, 10 years. My ID's in my wallet if you need to verify." Another moment of assessment. Then Venus lifted the intercom handset, keying the cockpit direct line. "Captain, I have a passenger who claims expertise with our electrical problem. Says he's former Boeing systems engineer." George's voice came back immediately. "Bring him forward." The cockpit door had been reinforced after 9/11, turned from a barrier into a fortress. Venus entered her code, the lock disengaging with a definitive click. The cockpit beyond was both more and less dramatic than movies suggested. No sparks or smoke, just two pilots surrounded by instruments, showing conflicting information, warning lights creating a Christmas display nobody wanted. "Talk fast," George said without turning from his instruments. "Your auxiliary bus is failing in a pattern consistent with capacitor degradation in the aft bay. The 737 to 800 seconds from the Sunset Airlines acquisition had a known issue with substituted components, cheaper capacitors that test fine initially, but degrade under thermal cycling. The cascade you're seeing is textbook for that failure mode. How could you possibly know we're from the Sunset acquisition? The cabin configuration, the overhead bins, the seat pitch and coach. Sunset ran a specific layout that's expensive to reconfigure. Most airlines don't bother." George and Janet exchanged glances. The man wasn't wrong. "What do you propose?" George asked. "Let me access the aft electrical bay. I can create a temporary bridge circuit to isolate the failing component and stabilize the auxiliary bus. It won't fix the problem, but it'll stop the cascade and give you clean power for approach and landing." "Absolutely not," came a voice from behind them. Isabella Sterling stood in the cockpit doorway, having followed the commotion forward. Wine stained her jacket, but her voice carried the authority of someone used to being obeyed. "The liability alone would destroy us. We don't let passengers access critical systems." "With respect," Ethan said, turning to face her. "Your liability concerns won't matter much if this cascade reaches the main bus while we're in instrument conditions. You don't know it will cascade that far." "You're right, I don't." He pulled out his notebook, showing pages of timing marks and calculations. "But the degradation curve I've been tracking suggests we have maybe 20 minutes before it does. less if we hit more turbulence, and the vibration accelerates the component failure. Isabella looked at the notebook, at the precise handwriting, the circuit diagrams drawn from memory. She recognized the quality of mind that produced such documentation: thorough, methodical, professional. Still, you're asking me to authorize a passenger to perform emergency maintenance on an aircraft in flight. Do you understand what you're asking? I'm asking you to let me prevent an emergency from becoming a tragedy. Captain Wilkins made the decision for all of them. Mr. Carter, you'll work under my direct supervision. You'll touch nothing without my explicit approval. If I say stop, you stop immediately. Clear? Clear. Miss Sterling, I'm invoking Captain's emergency authority. This conversation and decision will be logged, but I'm proceeding. George's voice left no room for argument. In the air, the captain's word was law, even over the CEO of the company that owned the aircraft. Venus led them to the aft galley, where a discreet panel provided access to the electrical bay. Most passengers never noticed it, disguised as part of the galley wall. She produced a key, the panel swinging open to reveal a cramped space filled with circuit breakers, buses, and bundles of wiring. Ethan surveyed the space with practiced eyes. The smell hit him first, that distinctive odor of overheated electronics, not quite burning but thermal stress evident. His trained ear caught a subtle buzz, the 60 Hz hum slightly off-pitch, warbling like a singer with a sore throat. I need a multimeter, insulated gloves, and bypass wire, 16 gauge or heavier. We have an emergency maintenance kit, Venus said, producing a red case from a locked compartment. Will this work? The kit was basic but adequate. Ethan pulled on the insulated gloves, checked the multimeter's battery, then began his diagnosis. The failing capacitor bank was exactly where he'd predicted, tucked behind a secondary panel. The components were aftermarket, their labels barely legible but the part numbers visible enough to confirm his suspicion: substitutes rated for automotive use, not aviation. Found it, he called to George through the intercom Venus held. The capacitors are bleeding voltage across an unshielded ground. That's creating the noise that's confusing your other systems. I can isolate this bank and reroute through the emergency sub-bus, but I need to install a bridge circuit first. Risk assessment? George's voice was steady but urgent. If I do nothing, cascade failure in 15 to 20 minutes. If I make a mistake, we lose auxiliary power immediately, but no affect on primary systems. If I succeed, you get stable auxiliary power at reduced capacity, maybe 60%, enough for normal operation. Do it. Ethan's hands moved with the precision of a surgeon. Strip the insulation, just enough but not too much. Twist the connection, clockwise for strength. Apply the bypass, ensuring clean contact without creating new failure points. Each movement was deliberate, learned through years of work where mistakes cost money, time, sometimes lives. Isabella watched from the galley, her usual CEO's distance impossible to maintain in the cramped space. She saw the concentration on Ethan's face, the way his hands never trembled despite the aircraft's occasional bumps. This wasn't heroics, it was competence, pure and refined. The first attempt failed. The bridge circuit held for 30 seconds. Then the oscillation returned. Actually worse than before. Ethan didn't curse, didn't panic. Just returned to his diagnosis. He'd missed something, some aspect of the system's behavior that didn't match his mental model. The sub-bus is showing feedback, he murmured. More to himself than the others. There's a protection circuit I didn't account for. He traced wires with his fingers, following the logic of electrons through copper pathways. There, the overcurrent protection is reading the bridge as a short. I need to add resistance to the circuit. Make it look like normal load. He pulled a resistor from the maintenance kit, checking its color bands: brown, black, orange, gold. 10,000 ohms, 5% tolerance. It would work if placed correctly. The mathematics flowed through his mind automatically. Voltage drop across the resistor. Heat dissipation. Effect on signal integrity. The calculations that had once designed systems worth millions now focused on a component worth pennies. The second attempt held. Lights steadied. The oscillation damped, then disappeared. The multimeter showed clean, stable voltage where chaos had reigned minutes before. Ethan watched for a full minute, waiting for failure, for some overlooked variable to assert itself. Nothing. The repair was ugly by engineering standards, a battlefield kludge rather than elegant design, but it would hold. Captain, auxiliary bus is stable. You're running at approximately 65% capacity. All protection circuits are active. You should have normal operation for approach and landing, but I wouldn't trust the galley power or entertainment systems. Copy that. Outstanding work, Mr. Carter. Return to your seat. We're beginning descent. As Ethan emerged from the electrical bay, face flushed with heat and exertion, he found the galley crowded. Several first-class passengers had gathered, drawn by curiosity or concern. Among them stood a man Ethan recognized from industry publications, Damien Cross, tall and gaunt, his silver-gray suit immaculate despite the chaos. "Impressive work," Damien said, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Though I wonder about the wisdom of letting amateurs access critical systems. The liability issues alone. The amateur just saved your flight," Isabella said curtly. She'd dealt with Damien before, knew his reputation for finding angles, exploiting situations. "Return to your seat, Mr. Cross." Damien's smile widened. "Of course. Though I'm curious about our savior's credentials. Ethan Carter, was it? I'll have to look you up." The threat was subtle, but clear. Damien smelled opportunity, story, leverage. In the aviation world, stories of improper maintenance or unauthorized repairs could destroy companies, careers, lives. He returned to his seat, already composing emails in his mind. The descent through the storm tested Ethan's repair. The aircraft bucked and rolled, each jolt potentially dislodging connections, creating new failure points. But the bridge held. The auxiliary bus remained stable, its reduced capacity sufficient for the modified approach Captain Wilkins was flying. They broke through the clouds at 4,000 feet, Seattle's skyline visible through rain-streaked windows. The airport appeared ahead, runway lights cutting through the gray afternoon like promises of solid ground. The landing gear extended, with its reassuring thump. Flaps deployed in stages, the aircraft configuring itself for landing, while passengers gripped armrests and tried not to think about what had almost happened. The landing was firm but safe. The reversers roaring as they decelerated down the rain-slick runway. As they taxied to the gate, Captain Wilkins made a final announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've arrived safely in Seattle. I want to personally thank you for your patience during our electrical issue. We had excellent support from our crew and, I'm pleased to say, from one of our passengers who provided critical assistance. Maintenance vehicles will meet us at the gate, so please remain seated until directed by the crew." At the gate, organized chaos reigned. Maintenance crews swarmed the aircraft. Airport authorities took statements. Mountain Airlines operations managers appeared with clipboards and concerned expressions. Through it all, Ethan tried to fade into the background, to return to the invisibility that had become comfortable since leaving Boeing. But Lily wouldn't let him. "Dad, you fixed the airplane." She announced this to anyone within earshot, including the cluster of reporters who'd somehow already gathered. "He fixes everything. He fixed Mrs. Chen's generator this morning, and then he fixed a whole airplane." "It was a small fix," Ethan said quietly, gathering their bags. "The pilots did the real work. But you knew what was wrong. You knew from the blinking." Archie Bell was waiting inside the terminal, his maintenance chief uniform rumpled from a long shift. He'd been Ethan's colleague at Boeing years ago, one of the few who'd stayed in touch after Ethan's departure. "Ethan, what the hell are you doing here?" "Flying to Seattle. Apparently fixing planes mid-flight. Long story." Archie looked at the commotion surrounding the gate. The maintenance reports already flowing across his tablet. "I'm reading the captain's log right now. Capacitor substitution in the auxiliary bus? We've been seeing that pattern in the Sunset acquisition birds, but couldn't trace the source. Check your supplier manifests against the original Boeing specs. Someone substituting automotive-grade components, probably through a third-party contractor. The parts test fine on the ground, but degrade under altitude cycling. That's a serious accusation. It's not an accusation, it's an observation. The components I saw had automotive part numbers. No way those met aviation specifications." Archie's expression darkened. He pulled up procurement records on his tablet. cross-referencing part numbers against supplier databases. What he found made him whistle low. These all trace back to a single supplier network, shell companies, but the signature's clear. He showed Ethan the screen. Cross Aviation Solutions, Damian Cross's outfit. Isabella appeared beside them, having changed into a spare blouse from her carry-on but still bearing wine stains on her jacket. "Gentlemen, I need to understand what happened on my aircraft." Archie made introductions, then showed her the procurement trail. Isabella's expression grew colder with each revealed connection. She'd suspected maintenance irregularities. But this was systematic fraud, substituting substandard parts, while charging for certified components. "We need documentation," she said. "Everything. Part numbers, supplier records, quality certificates." "I can help with that," Ethan offered, then caught himself. "I mean, if you need. Mr. Carter, I owe you an apology. I questioned your competence when I should have been questioning my own suppliers." She pulled out a business card, expensive stock, with embossed lettering. "I'd like to discuss a consulting arrangement. Someone with your expertise could help us audit our entire fleet. I appreciate the offer, but I'm not looking for corporate work. I have Lily to think about, and frankly, I've had my fill of aviation politics." "Dad fixes things," Lily interjected, appearing at his side with perfect timing. "But only if they're really broken." "Are your planes really broken?" Isabella looked at the 7-year-old, with her direct gaze and honest question. "Some of them might be, without us knowing it. That's what makes it dangerous. Then Dad should help. He says fixing machines is fixing people's lives." The rain continued against the terminal windows, Seattle's perpetual spring shower washing the aircraft clean of travel dust while leaving deeper problems untouched. Damian Cross had disappeared into the crowd, but his presence lingered like smoke from a hidden fire. The question wasn't whether he'd act on what he'd learned, but how and when. The Seattle maintenance hangar buzzed with controlled urgency. Under brilliant LED work lights, technicians swarmed over the 737, their movements precise and purposeful. Ethan's temporary repair had been photographed, documented, and carefully removed for analysis. The capacitor bank told its story to anyone who could read component date codes and degradation patterns, a narrative of systematic substitution that turned profit margins into potential tragedies. Isabella had commandeered a conference room overlooking the hangar, transforming it into a crisis command center. Laptops sprouted cables like technological vines. Printers churned out maintenance records. Her team from New York participated via screens propped on chairs, their faces pixelated but concerns clear. "We're looking at fleet-wide exposure," her CFO said through the laptop speaker. "If this substitution pattern extends beyond the Sunset acquisition—" "It does," Archie interrupted, entering with an armload of manila folders. "I've been pulling records all afternoon. Cross Aviation Solutions has contracts with 6 of our maintenance providers. Different company names, but same Delaware addresses, same signature patterns on the certificates." Ethan sat in the corner with Lily, who was coloring while he reviewed technical documents on a borrowed laptop. He tried to leave twice, but Isabella had asked him to stay, and Lily seemed fascinated by the controlled chaos of corporate crisis management. "Mr. Carter," Isabella called out. "This degradation pattern, how long before other aircraft show symptoms?" He looked up from a component specification sheet. "Depends on flight hours and thermal cycles. The capacitors I saw had maybe 3,000 hours on them. Figure another 5 to 10 aircraft are approaching critical degradation, maybe 20 more in the warning zone. We need to ground them all," someone said from New York. "Ground 30 aircraft?" The CFO's voice pitched higher. Do you understand the liability if one crashes?" Isabella cut him off. "Mr. Carter prevented that scenario today. We might not be lucky twice." The room fell silent, except for the rain drumming on windows. The weight of the decision pressed down like atmospheric pressure before a storm. Ground the planes and lose millions. Don't ground them and risk everything. "There's a third option," Ethan said quietly. Everyone turned to him. "Targeted inspection and replacement. I can identify the specific buses most at risk based on the degradation curve. Check those first. Replace only what's critical." You could do it during normal maintenance windows, minimize disruption. How long to develop that inspection protocol? With access to maintenance records and a team of technicians, 48 hours for a preliminary protocol, a week for comprehensive guidelines. Isabella studied him. You said you weren't interested in corporate work. I'm not. But Lily's right if the planes are broken. Someone should fix them. What's your rate? I don't have a rate. I fix generators and industrial equipment now, not aviation systems. Dad charges Mrs. Chen $75 an hour. Lily supplied helpfully. But she makes him cookies, too. Despite the tension, several people smiled. Isabella pulled out her phone. Calculating. The standard consulting rate for aviation systems expertise is $400 an hour. Given the circumstances and urgency, I'm authorizing $600. Plus cookies if that helps. Ethan shook his head. That's excessive. That's market rate for someone who can do what you did today. Don't undervalue expertise because you've chosen a simpler life. Before Ethan could respond, Archie's phone buzzed. His expression darkened as he read. We have a problem. Someone leaked the in-flight emergency to AvWeek. They're running a story about unauthorized passenger maintenance and questioning Mountain Airlines safety protocols. Isabella grabbed the phone, scanning the article. Her jaw tightened with each paragraph. The story had Damian Cross's fingerprints all over it, technically accurate, but spun to suggest recklessness rather than crisis management. He's trying to tank our stock price, she said. Create panic. Force a sell-off. Then sweep in with an acquisition offer. Can he do that? Archie asked. He's done it before. 3 regional carriers in the last 5 years. She turned to Ethan. He'll come after you too. Question your credentials, your judgment, make you the villain in this narrative. I didn't do anything wrong. That rarely matters in corporate warfare. Ethan felt the familiar tightness in his chest, the sensation that had driven him from Boeing years ago. The politics, the maneuvering, the transformation of engineering into weaponized narrative. He'd left to escape exactly this. Dad? Lily had stopped coloring, sensing his tension. Are you okay? I'm fine, sweetheart. Is someone being mean about you fixing the plane? Some people see problems differently than we do. Lily considered this with her particular brand of 7-year-old wisdom. Mrs. Patterson says when someone's mean, it's usually because they're scared or sad. Maybe the mean person is scared because they did something bad with the plane parts. The room went quiet. From the mouths of babes, Ethan thought. Lily's right. Isabella said slowly. Damian's not attacking from strength. He's covering something. The question is what? She pulled up Cross Aviation Solutions' corporate structure on her laptop, displaying a maze of subsidiaries and partnerships. Archie, how many of these companies are in your maintenance records? At least 6, maybe more with variant names. And they all provided substituted parts? Everyone I've checked so far. Isabella's fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling financial records, cross-referencing dates. A pattern emerged. Purchases of certified components, followed by returns for credit, replaced with cheaper alternatives that looked identical but lacked aviation certification. He's been running a parts laundering scheme, she said. Buy certified, return for credit, install automotive grade. The paper trail shows certified parts purchased, but the planes get garbage. That's fraud, someone said from New York. Federal crime, only if we can prove it. Right now, it's our word against his. And he's controlling the narrative. Ethan stood, pacing to the window. The 737 sat in the hangar below. Technicians still working, despite the late hour. He thought about all the aircraft flying with degraded components, all the potential Cascade failures waiting to happen. The engineering offended him, but the callous disregard for safety enraged him. What if we could prove it? He asked. Isabella looked up. How? The parts have date codes, manufacturing stamps. If we pull components from multiple aircraft and trace them back, we can show the pattern. But we'd need access to planes maintained by Cross's network. I can get that access, Archie said. Half those planes are sitting on our ramps right now. It would take days, Isabella said. By then, the story's set. Stocks crashed. Damage done. Unless we flip the narrative. Ethan turned from the window. Call a press conference. Tomorrow morning. Show them the actual components. Explain the technical details. Make it clear this was discovered and addressed because Mountain Airlines takes safety seriously. With you as the spokesman. The heroic engineer who saved the flight. I'm not a hero. I'm just someone who recognized a pattern. That's exactly what makes you credible. Isabella stood. Decision made. We do this together. I take responsibility as CEO. You provide the technical expertise. We present a united front of corporate accountability and engineering competence. I don't do press conferences. Dad, you're scared, Lily observed, not unkindly. Like when you had to call the bank about Mom's medical bills. But you did it anyway. Because it was important. Ethan looked at his daughter. This remarkable child, who saw through adult pretense with startling clarity. She was right. He was scared of exposure, of returning to a world he'd left, of failing publicly. But she was also right that some things transcended fear. Okay, he said quietly. But we do this right. No spin, no corporate speak. We tell the truth about what happened, what we found, and what we're doing about it. Isabella extended her hand. Agreed. They shook on it, a moment of alliance between worlds that rarely intersected corporate power and working-class expertise, united by necessity and mutual respect. The morning press conference was scheduled for 9 o'clock in the Mountain Airlines auditorium. By 8:30, every major aviation reporter in the Pacific Northwest had arrived, along with several national correspondents. The story had evolved overnight from corporate incompetence to something more complex: fraud, heroism, and the intersection of class and expertise in modern aviation. Damian Cross arrived at 8:45, taking a seat in the front row with theatrical precision. His presence was a challenge, a statement that he wouldn't be intimidated by accusations or implications. He caught Ethan's eye as the engineer entered from the side door, offering that cold smile that suggested he held cards, yet to be played. Isabella took the podium first, her presence commanding despite or perhaps because of the visible wine stain still faintly marking her jacket. She'd chosen to wear it rather than hide it, a badge of the crisis faced and overcome. Good morning. Yesterday, Mountain Airlines Flight 482 experienced an electrical system anomaly that required exceptional handling by our crew and the assistance of a passenger with specialized expertise. I'm here to discuss not just what happened, but what it reveals about challenges facing our entire industry. She was good, Ethan thought, watching from the side. No defensiveness, no corporate deflection. She owned the situation while broadening its scope beyond Mountain Airlines. The anomaly was caused by substituted components, parts that appeared correct on paper but failed to meet aviation standards. We've traced these components to a network of suppliers that have been systematically defrauding airlines for profit. She clicked a remote, displaying the corporate maze on screen behind her. This isn't about one bad part or one close call. This is about criminal fraud that puts every passenger at risk. Murmurs rippled through the reporters. Damian's expression remained neutral, but his hand moved to his phone, typing rapidly. Isabella continued for 10 minutes, laying out the scope of the problem, the steps Mountain Airlines was taking, the cooperation with federal authorities. Then she introduced Ethan. He approached the podium with reluctance visible in every step. The lights felt too bright, the attention too focused. But then he saw Lily in the back row, sitting with Venus, who'd volunteered to watch her. His daughter gave him a small wave, and he found his voice. I'm not supposed to be here, he began, earning surprised looks. I left aviation engineering 3 years ago to fix generators and industrial equipment. Simpler problems, cleaner solutions. But yesterday, I recognized a pattern in failing systems, because patterns don't change just because you change careers. He clicked the remote, showing his hand-drawn notebook pages now scanned and enlarged. These are the timing intervals I recorded during the flight. That's capacitor failure, specifically the kind you get when automotive-grade components are subjected to aviation pressure cycles. For the next 15 minutes, he explained the technical details with the same precision he'd once used in Boeing design reviews. But unlike those corporate presentations, he kept the language accessible, using analogies that anyone could understand. A capacitor became a water bucket with a slow leak. The cascade failure became dominoes falling. The repair became a temporary dam holding back floodwaters. The real issue, he concluded, isn't that components fail. Everything fails, eventually. The issue is that someone made a calculated decision to install parts they knew would fail prematurely, betting that the failures would be minor, manageable, or blamed on other factors. They bet wrong. The first question came from an Aviation Weekly reporter. "Mr. Carter, weren't you violating federal regulations by accessing aircraft systems as a passenger?" Before Ethan could respond, Captain George Wilkins stood from his seat in the third row. "I authorized Mr. Carter's actions under Captain's emergency authority. His expertise prevented a potential catastrophe. Any regulation that would prevent such assistance needs examining, not the person who provided it." More questions followed, rapid fire and probing. Isabella and Ethan traded responses, their different perspectives, corporate and technical, complementing rather than conflicting. They were finding a rhythm when Damian Cross stood. "I have a question for Mr. Carter," he said, his voice carrying easily through the room. "Isn't it true you left Boeing under questionable circumstances? Something about a disagreement over safety protocols that you felt were too stringent." Ethan felt the trap closing. Damian had done his research, found the kernel of truth, and weaponized it. The real story was more complex. Ethan had refused to sign off on cost-cutting measures that technically met requirements but sacrificed safety margins. His refusal had made him a liability, leading to a negotiated departure with a non-disclosure agreement. "I left Boeing for personal reasons," Ethan said carefully. "Personal reasons." Damian's smile widened. "How convenient. And now you appear as the hero of a crisis, offering expensive consulting services to solve a problem you claim to have discovered. Some might call that opportunistic. Some might call substituting fraudulent parts attempted murder," Isabella interjected, her voice sharp as winter ice. "Mr. Cross, your company's components were on that aircraft. Would you care to explain why automotive-grade capacitors with your supplier codes were installed in an aviation electrical system?" The room's attention shifted to Damian like spotlights swinging to a new actor. His composure cracked slightly, just a twitch at the corner of his eye, but he recovered quickly. Mountain Airlines maintenance providers source from many suppliers. If substandard components entered the supply chain, I'm sure the investigation will determine responsibility. My company maintains the highest standards and full documentation of all parts provided. Documentation can be forged, Archie called out from the back. Parts can be swapped after delivery. We're pulling components from every aircraft your network touched, Mr. Cross. Want to bet what we'll find? Damian's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and his expression shifted something between anger and calculation. Without another word, he turned and left the auditorium, his exit followed by several reporters, sensing a bigger story. Later, they would learn what that message contained. The FBI had raided Cross Aviation Solutions' warehouse, finding thousands of automotive-grade components repackaged with aviation labels. The investigation would eventually reveal a 5-year scheme affecting dozens of airlines, hundreds of aircraft, thousands of flights that had carried millions of passengers on degraded parts. But in the moment, his departure felt like victory. The press conference concluded with Isabella announcing a comprehensive safety audit, not just of Mountain Airlines but offered freely to any carrier concerned about component substitution. She also announced something unexpected. A new position, head of safety culture, reporting directly to the board, tasked with ensuring that technical expertise was heard at the highest levels of corporate decision-making. I'm offering this position to Ethan Carter, she said, catching him completely off guard. His actions yesterday exemplified what we need: someone who sees patterns others miss, who acts on principle regardless of pressure, who understands that fixing machines means protecting lives. Ethan stood frozen at the podium. The offer was extraordinary executive-level position, presumably executive-level compensation. A return to the aviation world at a level he'd never achieved before. but it meant returning to the very environment he'd fled, the politics and pressure that had driven him to the simplicity of fixing generators. Can I think about it? Of course. But know that this isn't charity or gratitude. This is recognizing that we need people like you, people who choose principle over profit, expertise over expediency. As the reporters filed out, chasing the cross story that was now breaking nationally, Ethan found himself standing with Isabella in the empty auditorium. The morning light streamed through windows, casting long shadows across empty seats. "Why?" he asked. "Why what? Why offer me that position? You could hire someone with more corporate experience, better credentials, someone who plays the game better." Isabella turned to face him fully. And for the first time, he saw past the CEO facade to something more personal. "Because I'm tired of people who play the game. I've spent 10 years surrounded by people who tell me what they think I want to hear, who manage up and delegate down, who see safety as a cost center rather than our fundamental purpose." She paused, seeming to wrestle with something. "My younger brother was on a regional flight 5 years ago that lost an engine due to maintenance fraud. They landed safely, but I'll never forget his voice when he called me after. He wasn't angry about the fear or the danger. He was angry that someone, somewhere, had made a spreadsheet decision that his life was an acceptable risk. So this is personal. Everything's personal when you realize the numbers represent people. Your daughter understood that immediately fixing machines is fixing lives. Most of my executives have forgotten it, if they ever knew." Before Ethan could respond, Lily appeared, Venus trailing behind. "Dad, are we done? I'm hungry. And Miss Venus says, there's a place with really good pancakes nearby." "Almost done, sweetheart." Lily looked up at Isabella with that direct gaze that seemed to see through adult complications. "Are you going to give my dad a job?" "I'm trying to." "Good. He needs something important to fix. He's been sad since Mom died. But he's less sad when he's fixing important things." The truth of it hit Ethan like turbulence, sudden, undeniable, reorienting. He had been sad, had chosen simple problems, because they didn't require the emotional investment that complex ones demanded. But yesterday, solving the crisis, he'd felt something he hadn't experienced in 3 years, fully alive, fully engaged, fully himself. "I need conditions," he said to Isabella. "Such as?" "I work from Denver primarily, travel only when necessary. Lily's needs come first, always. No corporate politics. I report to the board, not through layers of management. And I want Archie as my deputy, if he's willing." "Done, done, done, and I'll make Archie an offer he can't refuse." Isabella extended her hand again. "Welcome to Mountain Airlines, Mr. Carter. Let's fix some planes." They shook on it, this time with Lily watching approvingly. The moment felt like a completion and a beginning, an ending and an opening, a problem solved and a challenge accepted. 6 months later, the transformation was remarkable. The Mountain Airlines maintenance facility in Denver had become a model for the industry, with other carriers sending teams to study their protocols. The walls displayed charts and diagrams, but also photos maintenance crews with their families, the faces behind the expertise that kept aircraft safe. Ethan's office was deliberately modest, more workshop than executive suite. Technical manuals shared shelf space with Lily's artwork. His notebook, the same worn leather one, sat open on the desk, now filled with new patterns, new problems, new solutions. The industry had changed too. The Cross scandal had triggered federal legislation requiring component authentication that was nearly impossible to forge. Airlines that had once competed on cutting costs now competed on safety culture. The race to the bottom had become a climb toward excellence. But the real changes were smaller, more personal. Venus had been promoted to head of cabin crew training, her instincts for reading people recognized as invaluable for preparing flight attendants for crisis management. Archie ran the technical verification program, his gift for seeing through paperwork to actual problems, saving airlines millions while preventing potential disasters. Captain George Wilkins had become an advocate for empowering crews to accept help regardless of its source, testifying before Congress that expertise matters more than credentials in crisis. And Isabella had transformed from a CEO focused on financial metrics to one who understood that numbers meant nothing if the fundamental purpose, safe flights, was compromised. She still wore her signature red dresses, still commanded boardrooms, but now she also walked the hangar floors, talking with technicians, understanding their challenges. The partnership announcement happened on a clear October morning, the Denver mountains visible through the conference room windows. Isabella and Ethan stood together, no longer CEO and consultant, but genuine partners in reshaping aviation safety. Mountain Airlines is launching the Sarah Carter Foundation, Isabella announced, the name catching Ethan by surprise. He hadn't known she'd researched his late wife, learned about her work as a nurse, her dedication to patient safety that paralleled his own commitment to aviation safety. The foundation will provide scholarships for technical education, specifically for people transitioning from hands-on careers to engineering roles. We're calling it the Expertise Initiative, recognizing that the people who fix things often understand them better than the people who manage them. The program would eventually graduate hundreds of technicians, turned engineers, people who brought practical knowledge to theoretical problems, who understood that every schematic represented real lives at real risk. Later, as the announcement concluded and the executives dispersed to their various responsibilities, Ethan found himself on the tarmac with Lily and Isabella. A 737 was preparing for departure, its engine spinning up with that distinctive whine that had once meant crisis but now meant properly maintained power. "It sounds different," Lily observed. "Smoother. That's because everything's working the way it should," Ethan explained. "All the parts are correct. All the systems are balanced. Like you," she said simply. "You're balanced now, too." Isabella smiled, that rare, genuine expression she'd learned to allow herself. "Your daughter's quite the philosopher. She gets it from her mother," Ethan said. Then added, "The ability to see what needs fixing, even in people." They stood together, unlikely allies become genuine friends, watching the aircraft climb into the clear Colorado sky. The plane rose steadily, its systems humming in harmony, carrying passengers who would never know how close they'd come to tragedy 6 months ago, would never know about substituted capacitors or cascade failures, or the single dad and coach who'd recognized a pattern. But they would arrive safely. And that was enough. The notebook in Ethan's pocket contained new sketches now, not just circuit diagrams but organizational charts, training protocols, a vision for an industry where expertise was valued regardless of its source, where safety transcended profit margins, where fixing machines truly meant fixing lives. As they walked back toward the terminal, Lily between them, she asked, "What needs fixing next?" Ethan and Isabella exchanged glances over her head, both smiling at the question that had become their shared mission. "There's always something," Ethan said. "But now we have the right people to fix it. And the right reasons," Isabella added. The autumn sun climbed higher, warming the tarmac, glinting off the aircraft that came and went with mechanical precision. Each departure represented trust passengers trusting crews, crews trusting maintenance, maintenance trusting components, components trusting the integrity of everyone in the chain. That chain had been broken by greed, nearly shattered by fraud, but was now being rebuilt link by link, strengthened by principle and expertise, and the simple recognition that every flight carried not passengers but people, not statistics but stories, not liability but life. The Mountain Airlines hangar had become something more than a maintenance facility. It was a symbol of transformation, proof that industries could change, that corporate culture could evolve, that the distance between executive suites and working floors could be bridged by mutual respect and shared purpose. Damian Cross was serving a federal sentence for fraud, his empire dismantled, his substituted components recalled and replaced. But his real punishment was watching the industry transform without him, seeing safety culture become competitive advantage, expertise become valued currency. The press had moved on to other scandals, other crises, but the changes continued. Every component verified, every pattern analyzed, every voice heard, regardless of its origin. The mountain on the airline's logo no longer just represented geographic location, but the climb toward excellence, the peak of what was possible when principle met practice. As the weeks turned to months and seasons cycled through, Ethan's notebook filled with new patterns, new solutions, new bridges between what was and what could be. He still fixed generators on weekends, still helped Mrs. Chen with her equipment, still believed in the dignity of hands-on work. But now that work extended to larger machines, more complex systems, broader impacts. The story could have ended there, crisis resolved, villains punished, heroes rewarded. But real stories, like real flights, continue past the dramatic moments into the quiet work of daily excellence. Every morning, Ethan walked the hangar floor before dawn, checking the previous night's maintenance logs, looking for patterns others might miss. Every morning, Isabella reviewed safety metrics before financial ones, understanding that the former drove the latter. Every morning, Venus trained new flight attendants to see passengers as people with stories, not problems to manage. Every morning, Archie verified components with the dedication of someone who knew that each part represented trust. And every morning, Lily asked her father what he would fix that day, not knowing that she had already fixed the most important thing, reminding him that expertise without purpose was just knowledge. But expertise with purpose could change worlds, save lives, and restore faith in systems too complex for any one person to comprehend, but simple enough for anyone to improve. The planes continued to fly, their electrical systems stable, their components genuine, their crews empowered. Each flight was a small miracle of engineering and trust, of expertise and integrity. Of individuals choosing to do right when wrong would be easier, cheaper, more convenient. In his notebook, Ethan had written a new maxim below the old one. Fixing machines is fixing lives, but fixing cultures is saving futures. It was Isabella who'd suggested adding it after a particularly difficult board meeting where they'd had to argue for safety investments that wouldn't show returns for years. The board had approved the investments, understanding finally that returns meant more than quarterly profits. They meant passengers arriving safely, crews working confidently, and the knowledge that somewhere in coach, a single dad with a notebook might notice a pattern that everyone else had missed. The Denver morning sun caught the mountains, painting them gold against the blue sky. Another day of flights beginning. Another day of systems functioning. Another day of trust validated. Ethan stood with his coffee, watching the first departure of the day climb steadily skyward, its auxiliary bus humming perfectly, its capacitors holding steady charge. Behind him, Lily's artwork decorated his office wall. Pictures of airplanes and tools. Of her father at work. Of Miss Isabella in her red dress. Of Captain George in the cockpit. But the central picture, the one she'd drawn most recently, showed something simpler. Hands fixing a broken part, while other hands held a light to see by. Cooperation, she'd called it, the way things should work. And now, finally, they did. The story spread through the industry in ways both official and informal. Maintenance crews at other airlines began their own pattern analysis, finding problems before they became crises. Engineering schools added courses on practical diagnosis, taught by technicians who'd spent decades with their hands in machinery. Corporate boards reluctantly but increasingly included technical experts, people who understood not just spreadsheets but systems. Isabella spoke at conferences now, always beginning the same way. 6 months ago, I thought I understood aviation because I understood its finances. Then a single dad in coach taught me that understanding aviation means understanding that every number represents a life. Every component carries trust, and every voice, regardless of its origin, might carry the insight that prevents disaster. She'd become something rare in corporate leadership. An executive who'd learned humility without losing authority, who'd gained wisdom without sacrificing decisiveness. Her red dresses remained her signature, but now they represented not just power but purpose, not just authority but accountability. The Sarah Carter Foundation's first graduates were entering the workforce, bringing with them a unique perspective that bridged the gap between theoretical knowledge and practical application. They could read both spreadsheets and circuit diagrams, understand both corporate pressures and technical necessities. They were, in essence, translators between worlds that had spoken different languages for too long. One evening, as autumn gave way to winter and Denver prepared for its first snow, Ethan received a call that would have once seemed impossible. The Federal Aviation Administration wanted him to chair a new advisory committee on component verification and safety culture. It meant more travel, more time away from the simple fixes he still enjoyed, but it also meant institutional change at the highest level. Will you do it? Isabella asked when he called to discuss the offer. I don't know. It's a lot of bureaucracy, a lot of politics. It's a lot of planes flying with a lot of people who deserve someone in that room who cares more about their safety than about their own career advancement. Lily has a recital next month. I won't miss it. Then don't. Attend by video. Make it clear from day one that your priorities include both national aviation safety and your daughter's elementary school concerts. Set the precedent that expertise doesn't require sacrificing humanity. It was good advice, the kind that came from someone who'd learned to balance corporate demands with personal values, who discovered that the two weren't mutually exclusive but mutually reinforcing. Ethan accepted the position with conditions that would have seemed absurd in traditional government service remote participation when necessary, inclusion of frontline technicians in policy discussions, and the right to speak plainly, regardless of political consequences. To everyone's surprise, the conditions were accepted. The near disaster of Flight 482 had shifted paradigms, made the previously unthinkable not just possible but necessary. The first meeting of the advisory committee took place in a Washington conference room that had seen decades of decisions, some wise, some catastrophic, most forgotten. Ethan arrived with his notebook and a simple agenda. Listen to the people who actually touch the planes, understand the patterns they see, and create policies that reflect reality rather than theory. It would take years to fully implement the changes, years of arguments and compromises and small victories that felt like defeats, until their impact became clear. But it started there, in that room, with a single dad who'd fixed a plane because he recognized a pattern, setting a new pattern for how aviation safety would be approached. Meanwhile, life continued its smaller rhythms. Lily grew, her questions becoming more sophisticated, but her fundamental curiosity unchanged. She decided she wanted to be an engineer, but the kind who fixes things, not the kind who just talks about fixing things. Ethan had smiled at that, recognizing Sarah's influence even years after her death, her practical wisdom living on in their daughter. The apartment had given way to a small house, nothing fancy but with a garage where Ethan could work on projects and a yard where Lily could conduct her own experiments. Mrs. Chen still brought her generator problems, now accompanied by cookies that had become legendary in the neighborhood. On weekends when he wasn't traveling, Ethan taught informal classes at the community center: basic electronics, system diagnosis, the art of seeing patterns. His students ranged from teenagers to retirees, united only by curiosity and the desire to understand the machines that surrounded them. He taught them about capacitors and resistors, but more importantly, he taught them to question, to verify, to trust their observations even when authority suggested otherwise. One of his students, a former airline baggage handler named Marcus, noticed an unusual wear pattern on cargo door hinges during his shift. Following Ethan's teaching about documenting patterns, he photographed and recorded the wear over several weeks, eventually identifying a design flaw that could have led to catastrophic decompression. His observation, elevated through the new safety culture channels, led to fleet-wide inspections and modifications. You see? Ethan told his class when Marcus shared the story. Expertise isn't about degrees or titles. It's about paying attention, recognizing patterns, and having the courage to speak up when something's wrong. The class nodded, understanding rippling through the room like electricity through a properly functioning circuit. Winter deepened, snow blanketing Denver, muffling sound and softening edges. The Mountain Airlines hangar continued its work, crews maintaining aircraft with the dedication of people who understood their responsibility. The substituted components were long gone, replaced with genuine parts, verified through systems that made fraud nearly impossible. But more than the physical changes, the culture had transformed. Technicians were no longer just wrench turners but recognized experts whose observations carried weight in boardrooms. Pilots were no longer isolated in cockpits, but part of integrated teams that included everyone from baggage handlers to CEOs. The artificial hierarchies that had allowed fraud to flourish had given way to something more organic, more honest, more effective. Isabella and Ethan met monthly, sometimes in person, sometimes by video, always with the same agenda. What patterns were emerging? What problems needed solving? What voices weren't being heard? Their partnership had evolved from crisis response to crisis prevention, from fixing problems to preventing them. "We've had 0 safety incidents in 6 months," Isabella reported during one such meeting. "Not just no accidents, no significant incidents at all. Don't get complacent," Ethan warned. "The absence of incidents doesn't mean the absence of problems. It might just mean we haven't recognized the pattern yet." It was this vigilance, this refusal to accept success as permanence, that kept the transformation real rather than cosmetic. Every achievement was questioned, every system reviewed, every assumption challenged. The story of Flight 482 had become industry legend, told in training centers and boardrooms, in maintenance hangars and engineering schools. But like all legends, it had begun to drift from fact toward myth. The real lessons sometimes lost in the dramatic narrative. So Ethan wrote it down, all of it, in a report that would become required reading at aviation schools worldwide. Not the dramatized version, but the technical truth, the specific capacitor degradation, the exact cascade pattern, the precise repair methodology. But more than the technical details, he wrote about the human elements, the importance of listening to unexpected voices, the danger of prioritizing profit over safety, the value of expertise regardless of its source. The report concluded with something unusual for a technical document: a personal reflection. Every component in an aircraft exists for a reason, serves a purpose, contributes to the miracle of flight. When we substitute inferior parts for financial gain, we break faith with every passenger who trusts us with their lives. When we ignore expertise because it comes from unexpected sources, we blind ourselves to solutions that could save lives. When we prioritize spreadsheets over safety, we forget that every number represents a person with a story, a family, a future that depends on our integrity. I was just a single dad and coach who noticed a pattern, but that pattern could have been noticed by anyone paying attention. A flight attendant, a passenger, a baggage handler. The question isn't who has the credentials to speak, but who has the courage to speak and who has the wisdom to listen. Fixing machines is indeed fixing lives. But creating cultures where every voice is heard, where expertise is valued over hierarchy, where safety transcends profit, that's not just fixing lives. That's saving them. The report ended, but the work continued. Every day, planes flew with passengers who'd never know how close the industry had come to normalizing catastrophe, would never know about the substituted capacitors that could have failed, would never know about the single dad who'd noticed a pattern, and the CEO who'd had the wisdom to listen. But they would land safely. And in the end, that was everything. The first anniversary of Flight 482's emergency landing arrived with spring rain in Seattle, almost identical weather to that day of crisis. A small ceremony was held at the Mountain Airlines hangar, not a celebration, but a remembrance. A renewal of commitment to the principles born from near disaster. Captain George Wilkins spoke first. His words measured and thoughtful. "We're trained to handle emergencies, to follow procedures, to maintain authority. But that day taught me that sometimes the most important thing a captain can do is recognize when someone else has the expertise you need and the wisdom to accept help regardless of its source." Venus followed, addressing the assembled maintenance crews and flight attendants. Every one of us has the potential to prevent disaster. The question is whether we're watching for patterns, whether we're willing to speak up, whether the system is designed to hear us when we do. Isabella spoke about corporate responsibility, about the ease with which profit pressures could override safety considerations, about the constant vigilance required to maintain integrity in complex systems. We came close to catastrophe, not because anyone wanted planes to crash, but because a series of small compromises accumulated into significant risk. Every substituted component was a decision that safety mattered less than margin. We cannot, we will not, make those decisions again. Ethan spoke last, simply, his words carrying the weight of lived experience. A year ago, I was someone who'd given up on complex problems, who'd chosen simple fixes because they didn't require me to engage with systems I'd found disappointing. But Lily reminded me that important things need fixing, especially when the fixes are difficult. Every person in this hangar, everyone who touches these aircraft, has the capability to see patterns others miss. The question is whether we've created a culture where those observations are welcomed, elevated, and acted upon. He paused, looking at the assembled group mechanics in coveralls, executives in suits, flight crew in uniforms, all united by shared purpose. We have. Let's keep it that way. The ceremony concluded, but people lingered, sharing stories of patterns noticed, problems prevented, lives saved through vigilance and voice. The hangar hummed with conversation that crossed traditional boundaries, a baggage handler discussing load distribution with an executive, a flight attendant explaining passenger behavior patterns to an engineer, a mechanic teaching a board member how to read wear patterns on brake assemblies. This was the real transformation, not the policies or procedures, though those mattered, but the dissolution of barriers between expertise and authority, between those who knew and those who decided. As the crowd dispersed, Ethan found himself standing with Lily, Isabella, and surprisingly, Mrs. Chen, whom Lily had invited because she likes airplanes and Dad fixes her stuff. "It's a good thing you're doing," Mrs. Chen said in her careful English. "Making sure the planes are safe. My granddaughter flies to college every semester. I sleep better knowing people like you are watching." "Everyone's watching now," Ethan replied. "That's what makes it work." As they talked, a text arrived on Isabella's phone. Another airline, a competitor, was requesting consultation on implementing their own safety culture transformation. They'd had their own near miss, their own recognition that traditional approaches were insufficient. "Will you help them?" Isabella asked Ethan. "We'll help them," he corrected. "This isn't about Mountain Airlines winning. It's about everyone getting home safely." It was an unusual position for a corporate CEO to take, helping competitors improve, but Isabella had learned that in aviation safety, there were no competitors, only fellow travelers sharing the same sky. The consultation led to others, a cascade of positive change spreading through the industry, like the electrical failures had once threatened to spread through Flight 482's systems. But this cascade built rather than destroyed, strengthened rather than weakened, connected rather than isolated. Airlines that had once hidden problems now shared them, understanding that a lesson learned by one could save lives at another. Maintenance crews formed informal networks, sharing observations and patterns across company lines. Engineers began designing with maintenance in mind, understanding that theoretical elegance meant nothing if it couldn't be practically maintained. The changes weren't without resistance. Some executives clung to old hierarchies. Some board members questioned the costs. Some regulators moved with glacial slowness. But the momentum had shifted. Every safely completed flight was an argument for the new approach. Every prevented incident was proof that listening to expertise, wherever it originated, was not just ethical, but profitable. Ethan's notebook, now in its third volume, contained sketches of more than circuits. It held organizational diagrams showing information flow, training protocols that elevated practical knowledge, inspection procedures that caught what traditional approaches missed. Each page represented hours of observation, analysis, synthesis, the work of seeing what is and imagining what could be. One sketch showed particular promise: a digital platform where anyone in aviation could report patterns, anomalies, concerns, with AI helping to identify trends across companies, aircraft types, and regions. It would democratize safety observation, making every person in the industry a potential early warning system. "It's ambitious," Isabella said when he showed her the concept. "Sarah was ambitious too," Ethan replied, surprising himself by mentioning his late wife in a professional context. She wanted to create a system where any nurse could report medication errors without fear of punishment, where patterns could be identified before they became tragedies. She didn't live to see it implemented, but her hospital uses it now. Saves lives every month. Then we build it. For Sarah. For everyone who sees patterns others miss. The platform would take 2 years to develop, another year to implement. But when it launched, it would fundamentally change how aviation safety was approached. No longer would critical observations be trapped in corporate silos or lost in hierarchy. Every voice would have a path to being heard, every pattern a chance of being recognized. As spring turned to summer, Ethan stood once again on the tarmac, watching planes come and go. But now, he wasn't alone. Lily stood beside him, taller now, asking different questions. Do you miss the simple fixes? She asked. The generators and basic equipment. Sometimes, he admitted. There's satisfaction in fixing something completely. Seeing it work. Perfectly. But planes are never completely fixed, are they? They're always needing something. That's true of most important things. They require constant attention, continuous improvement. The moment you think something's permanently fixed is the moment it starts to fail. Lily considered this. Like people, Ethan smiled. His daughter's wisdom continued to surprise him. Exactly like people. A 737 lifted off, its engines roaring with controlled power. Every component verified, every system checked, every pattern watched. It climbed steadily into the afternoon sky, carrying its passengers toward their destinations, their futures, their stories yet to be written. Behind them in the hangar, work continued. Mechanics inspecting, technicians testing, engineers designing, all part of an intricate dance that kept the miracle of flight from becoming the tragedy of failure. Each person aware that their observations mattered, their expertise was valued, their voice could make the difference between safely landing and something unthinkable. The transformation that began with a flickering light pattern had become something larger. A reformation of how industries could work when they remembered that their ultimate purpose wasn't profit, but people. It had taken near disaster to catalyze change, but now that change was self-sustaining, driven by thousands of individuals who'd learned to see patterns, speak truth, and listen to expertise wherever it originated. As the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, Ethan made a final note in his journal. Today, all planes landed safely. Tomorrow, we watch for new patterns. It was a simple entry, but it carried the weight of commitment to vigilance, to voice, to the belief that fixing machines really did mean fixing lives, and that sometimes the most important fix was creating a culture where every person's expertise was recognized, respected, and heard. The story of Flight 482 would be told for years, taught in classrooms, analyzed in boardrooms, referenced in investigations. But the real story, the lasting one, was written in every safe landing, every prevented failure, every voice that spoke up knowing it would be heard. In the end, that was the true fix, not just the temporary bridge circuit that had stabilized failing capacitors, but the permanent bridge built between expertise and authority, between those who knew and those who decided, between a single dad in coach and a CEO in first class. United by the recognition that everyone's safety depended on everyone's voice. The planes continued to fly, their lights steady against darkening skies, each one a testament to what was possible when patterns were recognized, expertise was valued, and fixing machines truly meant fixing the systems that kept them and all of us aloft. If this story resonates with you, if you believe in the power of unseen expertise and the importance of speaking up for safety, please share it. Leave a comment about a time when someone's unexpected knowledge made a difference, when speaking truth to power prevented disaster, or when you've seen what happens when we value wisdom over credentials. Together, we can build cultures where every voice matters, where patterns are recognized before they become problems, and where fixing machines truly means protecting lives.